This is our fifth workshop in the 2023 New York State World Languages Professional Learning Series. My name is Candace Black, and I am your World Language Associate in the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages from the New York State Education Department. I'd like to welcome you to World Languages in the Elementary School and the Revised Standards. How can early language teachers create proficiency-based lessons that align to the revised standards? In this session, participants will discover how FLES teachers can plan engaging and developmentally appropriate lessons that promote proficiency development for students in grades K through 6. It is my pleasure at this time to be able to introduce you to Marissa Coulihan, our presenter. Marissa, would you like to introduce yourself and begin our webinar?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Great. All right. So I know that there are some professional learning opportunities coming up. I'm going to leave this slide here just in case you wanted to see that. Those are some upcoming ones. And as Candy mentioned, today's webinar will be about world languages in the elementary schools. And my name is Marissa. I use the pronouns she, her, ella in Espanol, and él en français. And I am so excited to be here. I have only been teaching FLES my entire career, so this is a pinnacle of my career to be here with you today and share with you a lot of the things that I've been learning along the way and taking this journey with me and how I connect the standards to my classroom. I'm currently teaching grades 2, 3, 4, and 5 Spanish at Springhurst Elementary School. I'm lucky to say that I have worked in 4 FLES programs over my career, and each program is unique, and each program has opportunities and challenges, as many of you well know, and we'll discuss some of those in just a bit. I also serve currently as the NYSAFELT president. That's the New York State Association for Language Teachers. I've also served at NEL as the executive secretary. That's the National Network for Early Language Learning. And I've been the ACTFL Special Interest Group Language Learning for Children chair for a few years prior to that. So as you can tell, I am very active in the professional world of world languages in elementary school, and I have a lot of mentors to thank for that and a lot of people who are here today to say thank you to. But let's get started. So as you might be familiar with these webinars, these are the symbols. We ask you to mute your microphone. If you see that little thought bubble, that means it's time to pause, reflect, and think alone. That will happen a couple of times today. At the very end of the session, you will have an opportunity to write in the chat box. Please don't write in the chat box right now. I won't be looking at it, and our helpers for the webinar won't be asking questions until the end. And lastly, if you see the folder icon, as Candy mentioned, there are several files in there from this webinar and from many other webinars that you will see and you might find familiar. All right, so today's goals. The first one is I can create engaging and developmentally appropriate lessons for my early language classes that align with the revised New York State standards. And I can identify ways to promote proficiency, development, and cultural competency by using authentic resources with early language students. All right, so I already gave you a little introduction about who am I and all the sort of programs I've been involved with. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about what is FLES. You might hear me use the word FLES. That's an acronym that is actually in flux right now. It has traditionally stands for Foreign Language in the Elementary School or Foreign Language Early Start. I've also heard it called Early Language Learning rather than using the acronym FLES or question mark, because this is an evolving term. And as you know, language evolves. And so by the time you watch this webinar again, it might be something else. So there's a little question mark for you. Today we will be focusing only on checkpoint A, and that is the young novice learner. And so if you are a checkpoint B or checkpoint C teacher, you might still get some things out of it. But today we're focusing on the novice learner, and at that, the young novice learner. And because of that, you'll notice that I am going to share with you multiple ways to guide lessons, use scaffolds, use supports, because we want to make sure that our lessons are developmentally and age appropriate for the youngest kids. So you determine what your students need. As the teacher, you are the professional. So I'm going to share some things and I'm going to tell you which grade levels I use those with. But as you know, you can adjust things and provide more scaffolds, remove some scaffolds, do what you need to do as a professional. So as I mentioned earlier, there are so many factors that might define a FLUS program, right? And I encourage you to think about where you are currently in your FLUS program. Maybe you're in an elementary school, maybe you're in a pre-K program, maybe you're in a middle school, but you're technically FLUS because you're below grade 7. So some things to consider today as I'm sharing and as you think about my program and your program and you compare are what languages are offered. Category 1 and 2 languages, those would be Spanish, French, Italian, German, Swahili, ASL. Those are considered category 1 and 2 languages, and those are a little bit more similar to English, and so you'll notice that on the proficiency levels, students can go a little bit farther, a little faster. Category 3 and 4 languages would be like Arabic, Greek, Hebrew, Mandarin, Korean, Japanese, Russian, and potentially classical languages. I've definitely heard of some Latin programs in 5th and 6th grade. And so you each have unique standards and ways to think about your proficiency levels, right? Think about your entry grade level. Currently, the first grade that in my district that has FLES in Spanish instruction is 2nd grade. I've worked in programs where that begins in kindergarten. I've worked in programs where it begins in 3rd grade. Maybe you're a middle school teacher and your program starts in 5th grade. So that all affects what your FLES program looks like. So if I'm introducing to you something that I do with my first level, like the first beginner classes, that might look differently at your entry level. Frequency, so how often do your classes meet? I'm lucky to say that I see my classes 15 minutes every single day. Some districts do once a week, twice a week, 3 times a cycle. Maybe it's every other day. Maybe it's once every 2 weeks. FLES is so different depending on what your schedule permits, right? Contact time, the duration of your class period. As I mentioned, I see my students daily for 15 minutes. I've worked in programs where it's 10-minute classes. I've worked in programs where we have 40-minute classes, 30-minute classes. So again, all of these factors will affect how you are hearing today, what I'm sharing, and then you may need to adjust. And lastly, do you push into the classroom? I push into the classroom. So I visit 12 classes a day, and that means I have 12 different classrooms I go into, and they all look very different. Where is the smartboard? Where are the crayons? Where are the scissors? Who has a folder? Who has a notebook? So that all depends on what you can do with your students, right? What your situation is. And if you're lucky, you might have a classroom where instruction takes place. So they come to you and they have class with you in your classroom. I've also done that, and that's wonderful too. So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what students can do with language, right? So when we're thinking about integrated lessons, that means integrating the 3 modes of communication: interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. And we're looking at things that students can do with language that are communicative. We want to make can-do statements that are child-friendly and that are broken down simply. So a simple mathematical equation, if you will, or some visual for you is I can plus a language function and then a context for communication. If you think about communicating in the real world, this is exactly what happens on a daily basis with speakers of any language or signers for ASL. So here we are with these revised standards, right? We have checkpoint A, and our checkpoint A learners are focused on the novice, mid, and novice high level. These are your first 3 standards, and I want to call your attention to some language here. The first thing I want you to notice is that with these students, we are focusing on familiar words and phrases, familiar questions and statements, very familiar everyday topics, and very familiar everyday topics when it comes to interpersonal and presentational, okay? So that means that you need to meet students where they are at their level. If they're kindergartners, if they're 3rd graders, if they're 4th graders, if they're 6th graders, right? So we're making things familiar to them where they are. Let me show you a little bit about the culture standards, standards 4 and 5, what they can do at this point. And again, we're talking about highly scaffolded in my own and other cultures with graphic or visual support. Okay, so everything that we talk about today is going to include some scaffolds and support for our students because that's what they need where they are at this checkpoint. I'm going to call your attention to that folder here, which is the language functions. You're going to see the interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational language functions here. And you might notice some things that you are already doing with your students, right? So if we think about it, can students understand? What's another way of understanding? Show me, identify, label, list, match. You're most likely already doing those things in your FLES classes. If a student is interpreting, they might be comparing, identifying, and inferring, or maybe making predictions. I like to do that a lot with my classes. And lastly, if they're analyzing, maybe they're classifying or identifying something else or reacting to something. So I just wanted to call your attention to how you're probably already doing a lot of these language functions. And these are the words that you want to use as you start to build your can-do statements for your lessons and your units. These are the language functions for interpersonal, asking and giving information, expressing feelings. That's a very popular thing to do in a FLES class, right? That kids are always expressing their feelings. They're never lost for words, right? And lastly, the presentational mode, you're going to notice describe and inform and explain and narrate. So these are words that we are using to describe what students can do with the language. I also want to call your attention to the world languages, themes, and topics for New York State. We have a modern languages copy and a classical languages copy because those would be different for both groups of languages. And that's also in the folder. So here we are, and we are going to give a few examples of some of these integrated lessons that I'm talking about. So the first one, let's take a topic I first started using years ago when I was teaching kindergarten, but now, as I mentioned, the first grade level that has Spanish in my school is second grade. So my second graders are using this theme, science, technology, and the arts. And the context is the 5 senses. So this is one of my favorites because it's highly engaging and it's relevant and it's really concrete language for those beginning language learners. So we start with visuals. I start with a song and a chant, and we give the students the opportunity to experience each of the 5 senses, so sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, in Spanish and in different ways. So I'm going to show you 3 examples of an integrated lesson of communicative tasks. So they're doing things, real world things with the language over the course of several days. And remember that my lessons are 15 minutes long. Perhaps if you are thinking about your program and your classes, you might be able to expand these or do things differently if you have a different type of program. So here we are talking about our sense of smell. My second graders can identify what smells good and what smells bad. Now you might be thinking, okay, this sounds like a lot of fun, and I can assure you that it really is, because for a second grader, there's nothing more fun than going like this and saying, oh, that is stinky. And if you can teach them that in the target language, they're going to start using that the rest of the school year. And that's amazing because they're using the language in context, right? So here I am providing input for my students. This is teacher-led. So we go one by one. I use this is word wall, and I use a group sort. And I definitely use some visual support for each word. And I ask them one by one, what do they think? The flowers, do the flowers smell good or do the flowers smell bad? And so they start to show me whether they think it smells good, whether they think it smells bad. This is a one-way message. They're getting input, but they're showing me that they're understanding by being able to identify with their finger, with their thumb, and some of them might be able to say it immediately. They might be able to say huele bien or huele mal, or they might just say bien, or they might just say mal, right? So it depends on where they are in their readiness. The next task that I have them do on the next day is what do young kids like to do? Well, Like I said before, they really like to express themselves. They want to be heard. So let's give them an opportunity to be heard. It's hard sometimes as a whole class to make sure you call on each student. So an interpersonal activity is perfect because it gives every student the opportunity to share in a pair or a small group. So this task is, does it smell good? Does it smell bad? I can ask and tell my preferences of various smells to a friend. You're going to make this a question. So in my previous lesson with the interpretive, I was saying, does this smell good? Yes, this smells good. Smells good, smells bad. Now we're turning it into a question. Does it smell good? Does it smell bad? And then we're going to have them agree or disagree with a friend's preferences of various smells. So in order to do that, I use a gesture like this, right? I believe this is ASL for I agree. I teach them how to say that in Spanish, which is estoy de acuerdo. And then I teach them how to say I disagree. No estoy de acuerdo. And we just go like this. And so I just learned from the wonderful Dr. Joanne O'Toole that is called, using multiple modalities, it's called dual encoding. And I've been doing this for a really long time, where you connect a gesture to a word or a phrase, and it helps students because it's increasing their retention. It's perfectly appropriate for this age group, and it's another way for them to be able to express themselves. So the way that I do this is I pair students up, and I give them this sheet, and I put it in a sheet protector, which is one of my favorite FLUS tools, and I give them a dry erase marker and a dry erase eraser. And as they are in pairs, they are asking each other and telling each other their preferences and agreeing and disagreeing. And then when you're done, after they're checking and making smiley faces or however you want them to annotate that page, they're having a conversation. And then they erase it, they hand it back to me, and I'm ready to go to my next class because I need something quick to clean up, right? So this is a wonderful reusable activity that you can do at any level in any context. Lastly, we are up to the presentational. So we're ready for an experiment. And any second grader would say that they love doing experiments. So what do? I grab some cups and I fill them with some smelly items. I have 10 cups. I use those little bathroom cups and I put the items in it, and then I cover it with foil and I poke little holes with a pencil in it so they can't see inside, but they can smell. And they are able to identify what I smell and express my preferences. What does that look like? This is the paper that they get. And so what they're doing is smelling each cup. They write what they think it is by using the numbers 1 through 10. And then on those little circle smiley faces, they're going to draw a smiley face, happy if it smells good, and not happy if it smells stinky. And then once they've taken their notes and done their experiments, they sit at their table and they present their findings. So that again is a one-way message. They present their findings and they present to their partner or their table. They will say something like, cilantro smells good, because they're looking at their paper. And they'll say, cilantro, I think cilantro is number 2. So that is a way to do this as a presentational mode. Now you might notice that we chose specifically and intentionally this vocabulary. We included this vocabulary from previous lessons because we want to be intentional. We want to use cognates. We want to use words that are similar in English. And we want to use that visual support for them because at this stage, that's what they need. All right, so let's pause for a moment and take some time to process. So I want you to think alone. How is what you just saw appropriate for early language learners? And consider what standards-based tasks related to this context, the 5 senses, you might do with your early language students. Let's talk about another set of integrated lessons that I use. This time, I'm going to talk to you about my 5th graders. So my 5th graders have had Spanish since 2nd grade, although currently that included pandemic years, so I'm not sure how we're counting that. But technically, this is their 4th year of Spanish. And as I mentioned earlier, this theme and topic can be adjusted to any level based on what your program looks like. You just might need to change what is age appropriate or developmentally appropriate as you watch, okay? So the theme is identity and social relationships, with the topics identity, family, and social relationships. Even though this topic is identity, family, and social relationships, I chose to focus, as you can see that I bolded, family relationships, okay? So first, in interpretive mode, I provide students time to process what they are hearing one by one, and we go through some of these words to describe, they can use to describe themselves. And here are some examples. So what are you like? I am talented, athletic, generous. I am friendly. I am intelligent. We make sure we use either cognates or gestures, just like I mentioned before. We do lots of vocabulary building, and they're able to identify words that they can use to describe themselves. I choose to focus on positive self-talk instead of using more negatively connotated words. That was an intentional choice. Again, you can do what works for you in your program. As we continue with this context, and after some more vocabulary building activities, my students are ready to describe themselves. And so they're going to use new and recycled vocabulary from this unit and units prior, maybe even years prior. And they're going to fill out a small piece of paper with sentence starters. Those are the scaffolds. I like to use sentence starters as scaffolds because I think it really helps build confidence in my students, especially at the novice level. And then eventually you can take those away. But when we're first starting, I love to use those sentence starters. They are going to fill out my name is, I am this many years old, they describe themselves, and they say what they like to do. Now we're going to play a guess who game. And I happen to teach in a school where it's pretty small. Most of the students know each other, and sometimes they find something interesting about each other that they didn't know. But this game we call Guess Who, and it becomes an interpretive communication task where they can identify a classmate based on description. So I read the clues aloud one by one. Now, of course, I don't start off with this student's name is, because that would reveal who it is. But I might start out by saying, this student is 10 years old. They think this is so funny because they're all 10 years old. And so they're like, how am I supposed to guess who it is? And at that point, it's really just a guess. But I like to turn this into a game because, as you know, fifth graders love competition. So the way that we made this into a game was, if the student can guess who it is after just one clue, they get 5 points. If they can guess who the student is after 2 clues, so I might say, this student is 10 years old and this student is tall and generous, then they get 4 points. If they can guess who it is after 3 clues, so I will say the student is 10 years old, the student is tall and generous, and the student likes to cook. If they can guess that after 3 clues, then they get 3 points. And then if they need 4 clues, which is their name is, then obviously they get it at that point, and they get 2 points. You can adjust it however you want. Remember, it's flesh, so we like to have fun making things up as we go along, and sometimes something sticks. So this was something we tried this year, and we were like, you know what? We really like that. We're going to do it again. What I really love about this is that I'm scaffolding for them as I'm reading their clues. I'm taking their first person language, so they wrote my name is, and I'm then reading it as this student's name is, and I'm making it third person. And so they're hearing that language modeled for them, because eventually for their summative performance task, they're going to have to describe a family member and use that third person language. Okay, so here we are. We're at the performance assessment task, which is mirroring what they've been doing all along. It's really great to align your assessments with your activities and tasks that you've been having them do all throughout your unit. It shouldn't be a surprise for them. We want to build confidence in students and show them what they can do. And so here you go. My student created a Google slide presentation where she said, this is me, my name is, she used all of those sentence starters that we used at the beginning. She described herself, she added pictures, she added animation, and then she described her cousin here. This was her family slide, and her cousin's name is this, her cousin is 11, her cousin is really friendly, and she likes to paint and do art. So this was one of my students' summative performance tasks. All right, so let's pause one more time for a moment and take time to process. I encourage you to think alone. How is what you just saw appropriate for early language learners? And consider what standards-based tasks related to this context of who am I, identity, family, relationships, you might do with your early language students. Okay. So earlier this year, back in December, I had the pleasure of participating in a unit plan exemplar for elementary school language teachers workshop, where we were given time, which we never have, so thank you, Candy and Dream Team. We were given time to, and the tools and the time for feedback to create a unit plan aligned to the revised standards specifically for early language learners. Often we're in workshops with middle and high school teachers, and we're sitting there thinking, but this doesn't look the same in my elementary classroom, or this doesn't look the same in 5th grade, or kindergarten has to do something totally different. So I appreciate having that time and that space specifically for my early language classes. So some new learning for me was that you can pick an anchor theme and an anchor topic, and you can also include integrated topics, right? So if there's something that you might know about me, I have a really hard time choosing just one thing if I have multiple options. I'm the type of person that wants it all the time. And so this was maybe a little indulgent and maybe a little enabling, but I appreciated that we can take a theme and integrate some other topics incorporated in that same theme. So I didn't just have to focus on leisure. I could focus on leisure and also a little bit of physical environment and also a little bit of community and also a little bit of shopping, right? Because it's never usually just one thing. So what was the theme and the topic that I decided to talk about? Well, in December, we were gearing up for what to do on a snow day. And this was planned specifically for my 4th grade students. Again, you might adjust it to fit your needs as an early language teacher. You can potentially do this with a different age group, but for me, this was for 4th grade. Here was my anchor topic, and here were my integrated topics. So I do want to share with you, I'm going to be vulnerable for just a moment because I want you to know that this is still a unit plan in progress. And so as teachers, we're always making adjustments. I specifically want to point out that when I first planned it, I said this was going to take 3 to 4 weeks for this unit, and it took a lot longer than that. And so now I know that, and for next year, I might adjust it. I may make some changes to some of the tasks. But again, it does not have to be perfect, especially the first time through. It's great that I have a template here, and everything that NYSED has, OBEWL has done to set us up for success is exactly this. We have all of the tools that we need to build these unit plans and lessons that are aligned to these 5 standards. So the following are some examples of integrated lessons of communicative tests over the course of several weeks/months. On day 1, I found this great authentic resource. So, you know, everybody and their mother has a YouTube channel these days. And so if you just Google a topic like, what do I do on a snow day? But you put it in your target language, you will find so many resources that are authentic because they are made for the target audience, target culture. And they're just perfect for exactly what you need. So I found this little boy from Argentina who he and his brother have a YouTube channel, or a vlog, I guess you call it. And it's a video of him showing him and his brother and what they do in the snow. They were taking a trip to a mountain. And so this was really fun. I had my students, before viewing, scaffold this authentic resource, and I had them make predictions what they thought they were going to see in the video. What were these boys going to do? So you might notice that because this is new language for them, I used some visual support and scaffolds, right? So I gave them the picture. So if they didn't know the word esquiar, they have a picture here that helps them understand that that word probably means skiing, right? So they make their predictions, and then we continue to it during viewing. This is still the interpretive mode. And so we're gonna, I know that we're all, if you are like me in a testing grade right now, the classroom teachers grades 3 through 8 are in high, like preparing for New York State testing mode. And so students will understand, I can understand the main idea and some details in an authentic resource. Side note, it's wonderful when the classroom teachers see you doing these things in your classes because it reinforces what they are doing with their students. And it just shows the value in our FLUS programs and that we are reinforcing all of the skills that students need. The only thing is we're doing it in a different language, but these are transferable skills across languages, right? So as they're watching, they are going through and checking their predictions, okay? So they're seeing if they were right about skiing, they're gonna see which ones they saw, they watch it, and then finally, we do an after viewing. And the after viewing is teacher-led, so I might ask them at the end to check their accuracy of their predictions, right? Which one was correct? So we will go one by one, and here I am reading the words, right? Esquiar, were the boys skiing? Did they ski? And then they say yes or no. If there is a situation where there is a disagreement, one student thinks, yes, there was a ski, and another student says, no, I didn't see any skiing, we go back to the resource, we go back to the video, we rewatch that part that the student thinks they saw it, and then we can make a decision together about whether the boys in the video were skiing or not. And then that's also organic language in the moment. I really love doing things like that. So you'll see that these before, during, and after viewing give students these multiple opportunities to hear comprehensible input and build capacity for the rest of the unit. Okay, so those were 3 different tasks using the same video. And when you find a great resource, I know Lori always says this, you really milk it for all it's worth, right? So that's that. Then after some vocabulary building activities, the students are ready to do an interpersonal task, which means, again, remember my second graders, all they wanted to do is talk about what they like and what they want and what they prefer. And so we're gonna let the 4th graders do that too, because they still like to do that. And so they're gonna talk about what they prefer to do on a snow day. I found 3 great authentic resources. I found a magic sled. This is just, I think this is just a product review, you know, like they were reviewing this magic sled that you can buy. There's a man making an igloo, and then there's a mom and her daughter painting in the snow. And so I show them snippets from each of these videos, and then students do a turn and talk. So they turn to a partner and they talk about their preferences about snow day activities. I want to call your attention to this right here. I prefer and you. That and you has been game changing for me. I've been using that over the past few years because as novice students, my students are not ready to ask questions. Maybe they can ask a very simple question that we've done over and over and over and over and over again, like, how are you? But they're not making up their own questions. That is not level appropriate for a novice speaker. But what can they do to continue the conversation and ask someone else's opinion? They can say, and you, in Spanish, that's y tú. It's so easy to include in any conversation that you're having. And the students know it now because we've been using it for so long that it's an easy way to just include a friend and keep it interpersonal. Right. The next thing that I'm going to talk to you about is my summative performance task. So this time, I'm asking students to list the activities and or put a check next to activities featured in a snow day video without image support. This is nearly identical to that first activity, except for one thing, and you probably notice it, right? So this time they're not predicting, and they don't have image support. So this way I can see if they are meeting this assessment expectation independently on their own without any of the scaffolds. So this is an opportunity for them to show me what they know. That's what we call assessments now. Show me what you know. All right. And then another task that I have them do here for the presentational communication is an information gap summative performance task. An information gap activity is so useful in the FLUS classroom. Essentially, I have information that you need to complete a task, and you have information that I need to complete a task. And so we need to share that information so that the other person can complete the task. And so what we decided to do was describe what the mascot is wearing. I'm going to share with you the Springhurst Elementary mascot. His name is Bob, and that stands for Be Our Best. And I have the students on this side of the paper draw 3 pieces of winter clothing for Bob. So they might draw a hat, a scarf, and pants. And then at the bottom, they have to write what he is wearing. Okay, so that is the presentational task. And then that turns into an interpersonal task because they have to pair up with a classmate and ask and tell what your Bob, what your mascot is wearing, and then draw it on your paper. So here it says, this is my friend Bob, and my friend Bob is wearing, so I have to listen as they tell me, I have to write it down, and then I have to draw it. At the very end of this activity, it's really fun. The aha, final moment is that they get to compare what they drew to what their partner thought they said or thought they needed to draw, and see how accurate of a mascot they actually were able to come up with. I have to say, my students really rose to the occasion, and they were really good. So here you can really level up here. You can include colors. You can include ways to describe clothing, like the hat has stripes. You can say the scarf is an athletic scarf, and you can really give students some more language that they can play around with this one and be creative. So this was ask and tell a classmate what clothing the mascot is wearing, and the language they're using is, what is your mascot wearing? My mascot wears. Right, so let's pause for a moment and take time to process. How was what you just saw appropriate for early language learners? Consider what standards-based tasks related to this context you might do with your early language students. All right. Now, it wouldn't be an early language workshop without mentioning play, right? Play is critical for early language learners. It's critical, quite frankly, for any learner. And I say that to every level teacher. I'm saying to you as my elementary and early language teachers that play is important at this level. And I want to show you a couple of examples of how I incorporate play in my classroom. And we do this for many reasons. We do this to build community. We do this to reinforce vocabulary, naturally, for the task, the communicative tasks I have them do. But most importantly, we do it to have fun, because this job is joyful and it needs to continue to stay joyful. So let's go back to my second grade 5 senses context. And I want to share a game that I first learned through my collegial circle. Shout out to the Scarsdale FLUS program. This game is called Four Corners. In order to set up this game, let me give you the context of this onomatopoeia infographic, okay? So here we have an infographic from Spanish Playground. And first, the first thing I do is introduce the students to the different sounds in Spanish. So instead of achoo in English, we say achis in Spanish. And we have a really fun time comparing, that's the standard 5, cultural comparisons, how it sounds in English and how it sounds in the target culture, right? And then we make this into a chant. So we start at the bottom and we go, traca, 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 plick, plop, mwah, yum, yum, kiki. You get the point, right? So we act it out, it becomes a chant. And then I introduce the game Four Corners. They already know this game because we play it with mostly every unit that we have. But essentially, I choose 4 of the sounds. I have chosen here gloop gloop, this is drinking, kikiriki, that's a rooster, traka traka, that's the train, and tuk tuk, which is knocking on a door. And I write each of those on a whiteboard, and I place those around the room in 4 different corners. So gloop 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 might be by the door, kikiriki might be by the sink, traka 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 might be by the mailboxes, and tuk tuk might be by the teacher's desk. Although be careful, maybe don't put it by the teacher's desk because they don't usually like that. And then I call one student to the front of the class, and that student turns around with their back to everything else, the whole class, all the other students. So they're not looking at what's behind them. And we start to sing, traka, 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 plick, plop, mwah. And by the time we get to the end and I say, stop, all of the students have to be at one of those 4 corners. So they have to pick one. So you see here, 3 students picked gloop, gloop, gloop. 1 student picked kikiriki, and 4 students picked tuk, tuk, tuk. The student at the front, without looking, has to pick one of those sounds. So they might say tuk, tuk, and everybody at the tuk, tuk station is eliminated. They have to sit down. Now, I know that some teachers don't like to play games where there's eliminations. I have to tell you, we run these games so quickly, the pacing is really fast that students are never sitting for more than a minute because I control how fast we sing, or you can just count to 10, or you can do it as quickly as you need to. And really, they're just watching to see who stays in and who is eliminated until it gets down to one student who's running around trying to find the spot that the student in the front is not going to pick. And at the very end, if the student at the front does not pick where the other student is, then the student who's at the corner, they end up winning the game, and it's a lot of fun. And then we play another round, and because they're second graders, we move right along, and nobody really cares much about the winning and the losing. It's just a lot of fun because they get to run around the classroom for a few minutes. So that is Four Corners, and that's how we do it with these cultural comparisons. Another fun game that I like to play that requires absolutely no prep is called Change the Number. I call it Cambia el Número in Spanish. It's a type of memory game. And I would say that this is best for ages 3rd grade and up because of the cognitive memory that you need for this game. I would suggest if you play it with younger grades, you give them some more scaffolds, but here's how you play. So you ask your students to circle up and you start counting. You count off to the number 10. So we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, 10. Okay, 10. You get to decide what kind of hat. So this is my vocabulary, right? We were building some vocabulary of how to describe a hat. So he might say, I'm going to pick, the number 2 is el gorro de rayas, which is a striped hat, right? So instead of the number 2, from now on, we have to say el gorro de rayas. So it starts like this. 1, el gorro de rayas. 3, 4, 5, etc., etc., etc. The students really love this game. Imagine after 3 or 4 rounds, how many they have to keep in their head and how many times they might make a mistake. It happens a lot and it's totally fine. The way I usually handle that is if a student makes a mistake, they sit down. But then if they're out and another student makes a mistake, if they can fix it, they get back in the game. So if a student made a mistake and then we were going 1, 2, the person said 2 instead of el gorro de rayas, and my student who was out said, I know, it's supposed to be the hat with the stripes. And that student comes back in and the other one sits down. So it's sort of a way for them to get back in it without, so they don't tune out. They still have to pay attention to what's going on. And the reason I say 3rd grade and up is because it's a lot to keep in your head conceptually. If you want to play this with younger grades, I have had success writing the numbers on the board. And every time something is chosen, I might write next to the number 2, el gorro de rayas. So they know when we say 2, they're supposed to say el gorro de rayas. So that's another scaffold you can use with the youngest kids. All right, and lastly, I want to talk a little bit about an essential aspect to any world language classroom, and especially early language, because we need to keep our language classes relevant and engaging. You know what happens when a 2nd grader tunes out, right? If you're not interesting, engaging, or relevant to them, they just start to tune out. So I want to talk to you about a routine that I started a few years ago called Calendar Talk. And it's a place, so this is my good friend and colleague, Natalia Hernandez. She creates these calendars. I put that in the resources page. And I take a shell of a calendar, so this is the month of April, and I place on there all sorts of things. So they're holidays, they're specific to my school. So you can see we had an international fair this past Saturday, Earth Day, the ELA exams, chorus festival, Passover, vacation. It's chock full of information. And so this is a place where students have meaningful conversations with the teacher. We're having, back and forth, where we might build community. I might ask, who is celebrating this holiday? Who has a birthday in this month? And it's just a really nice way to connect with your students. And it's something that they really care about and they want to share. And I've learned a lot about who my students are, even my little novice 2nd, 3rd, 4th graders who don't have a lot of language yet, but they can raise their hand if I ask them if they celebrate Ramadan. And I learned something new about them, right? And they're very proud about that, to share about that. This is a great opportunity for ongoing conversation. I keep this slide up for every lesson that I come into, and this is sort of how I introduce, hi, today is Tuesday, and today we're still celebrating Ramadan, right? So that's how we talk about it. And so at the beginning of the month, I might introduce my calendar, and then every day after that, we just do a quick little, oh, remember today is Ramadan. Oh, remember today is, or maybe not today because we wouldn't have been in school then, but yesterday was Orthodox Easter, so did anybody celebrate that? And so it's just nice to see the students represented, and I think representation is really important, especially at the young levels. Okay, so these are my purposeful routines. And now we get to pause another moment. How was what you just saw appropriate for early language learners? And you might consider what type of play and or purposeful routines you want to do with your early language students. So let's revisit today's goals. And I just want to kind of say reinforce what I said at the beginning. So I think it's so important as I'm discovering where I am in this process and going through all of the revised standards workshops and professional development. Is that it's really important to stay informed, but I'm realizing that it's validating what I'm already doing. A lot of this we're already doing in our classes. It's just that moving forward, now I can kind of see this through the lens of thematic instruction and using that language function and context for communication as the anchor for my lessons and units. So today we were able to create engaging and developmentally appropriate tasks for early language classes, identify ways to promote proficiency development and cultural competency with our early language students. And with that, I invite you to use the chat to ask any questions that you might have. And I know that my trusty friends, Dream Team, are here to help ask those questions. So open that up to you now.
While we're waiting for people to enter their questions into the chat, I want to remind you that we have put in several places in the chat the link to the handouts folder, which has several handouts that you can use following this webinar, and that we will be adding into this folder as soon as this webinar is concluded, a PDF copy of Marissa's PowerPoint so that you will have access to this as well.
Thank you, Candy.
So far, we don't have any questions, but we've had thank yous and a wow and wonderful ideas. So people are very excited about what you've shared with them. But yes,
Thank you.
please, if you have questions for Marissa, put them in the chat and we'll make sure that she can have an opportunity to respond to you. I think you're an inspiration here, Marissa. People are really appreciating what you've had to offer.
So happy to hear that. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
So while we're waiting for any last minute comments or questions, I am going to end the recording. So wait for it here.